December 17th, 1944. The Ardennes forest, Belgium. The trees stood still, frozen like statues under a thin layer of snow. The mist hung low, muffling the world into a dull, gray silence. Only the faint sound of boots crunching through the frost broke the stillness. Somewhere inside that white fog, a young German corporal named Franz Müller adjusted the strap of his rifle. His uniform was damp, his breath visible in the icy air. He and his men had marched for hours, weary, hungry, but burning with belief. They had been told this was the counterstrike that would turn the war. Hitler had promised them, "This will split the Allies in two. We will reach Antwerp. We will force the Americans to sue for peace." Every soldier in that forest carried that promise like a spark in their chest. But what none of them knew, not even the field commanders, was that something invisible was waiting for them. Something the German army had never faced before. A weapon not defined by its steel, but by the mathematics of death. The fog thickened. Then, without warning, the forest erupted. Shells screamed through the air, precise, simultaneous, and utterly devastating. No whistling crescendo, no gradual buildup, just impact after impact, as if the heavens themselves had detonated. Within seconds, tree trunks shattered, snow turned to ash, and men were thrown like rag dolls into the earth. Müller barely had time to dive before the blast wave hit. The air itself seemed to explode. And then, silence again. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of disbelief. When the barrage ended, the German line was gone. Entire squads simply ceased to exist, and the few survivors kept whispering the same thing. It was like the Americans already knew where we were. They called it the Iron Rain, but to the American gunners behind the lines, it had another name: time on target. Long before that deadly morning in the Ardennes, deep within the factories of Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Chicago, another kind of army had been at war. An army of engineers, mathematicians, and machinists, men and women who didn't carry rifles, but wielded slide rules, drafting pencils, and welding torches. While Europe burned, the American industrial heartland roared to life. Detroit, once the capital of automobiles, had become the arsenal of democracy. Ford's Willow Run plant, once making sedans, now produced a B-24 bomber every 63 minutes. General Motors built tanks by the thousands, and hidden within these factories, precision instruments and fire control systems were being designed quietly, methodically, by people who knew that wars were not just won on the battlefield, but in the factory. The American army had learned a lesson from the First World War. Victory doesn't belong to the bravest, it belongs to the most coordinated. So in 1940, before the United States had even entered the war, military planners began working on something extraordinary: an artillery system that could combine mathematics, communication, and firepower into one seamless killing machine. Every American artillery battalion had what was called an FDC, Fire Direction Center. At its heart sat a small team of men, surrounded by maps, radios, and calculating tables. They were the unseen minds behind every shell. When a forward observer, a soldier with binoculars somewhere on the front, called in a target, the FDC sprang to life. Within seconds, coordinates were received, translated, and computed. Wind, elevation, humidity, shell weight, barrel wear, every variable mattered. The FDC didn't guess, it calculated. And every gun in the battalion received its firing order at the exact same instant. Each shell was timed to arrive simultaneously, time on target. To the Germans, it felt like magic. But it wasn't magic. It was American mathematics. Artillery in World War II wasn't about who had the biggest guns. It was about who had the smartest system. The German Wehrmacht still relied on methods refined during the Great War. Manual triangulation, observers shouting over field phones, delayed synchronization. They were accurate, but slow. The Americans had turned the battlefield into a science experiment. Using new technologies like the M18 field plotting board, gunners could coordinate across miles of terrain in mere seconds. Instead of one battery firing randomly, 10 batteries could act like one giant gun. The result? When a German column was spotted, even for a few seconds, that entire area could be annihilated before a single man could react. By late 1944, this precision had reached terrifying efficiency. At the height of the Battle of the Bulge, over 1.2 million shells were fired in just 2 weeks. Every blast was recorded, measured, refined. It wasn't chaos. It was orchestrated destruction. But there was another layer, a secret one, a technology so advanced that even the Germans with their V-2 rockets and jet aircraft couldn't comprehend it. It was called the variable time fuse, or simply the VT fuse, a tiny radar system built inside a shell's nose. When fired, it emitted invisible radio waves. As those waves reflected off nearby objects, like enemy soldiers, tanks, or trees, the fuse detonated at the perfect moment, above the ground, maximizing the kill radius. Before VT, artillery shells exploded on contact or by timer, often wasting their energy. With VT, a single round could wipe out an entire platoon. The science behind it was staggering. Each fuse contained miniature vacuum tubes, soldered by hand under microscopes. They were so delicate that even a fingerprint could ruin them. So production was done by thousands of women in temperature-controlled facilities across the U.S. By late 1944, over 20 million VT fuses had been produced, a triumph of engineering secrecy. Even American frontline troops didn't know how they worked. And when they were unleashed during the Ardennes counteroffensive, the effect was devastating. German soldiers later recalled that the shells seemed to burst in the air, raining steel fragments downward in perfect cones. It didn't just destroy, it demoralized. Because how do you fight an enemy that kills you before you can even see him? By Christmas Eve, the Ardennes offensive was crumbling. The ghost divisions that Hitler promised would reach Antwerp were now nothing more than exhausted survivors scattered through the forest. Fuel shortages, broken supply lines, and relentless artillery made retreat their only option. Captured German diaries told the story best. One soldier wrote, "Every time we moved, they were waiting. We never saw the guns, only the explosions." American gunners had perfected a doctrine, one that blended technology, teamwork, and industrial might into something unstoppable. By the war's end, U.S. artillery accounted for nearly 60% of all German battlefield casualties on the Western Front. The Battle of the Bulge wasn't just the last German offensive. It was the moment when the world realized what the future of warfare looked like. It wasn't just courage or leadership. It was systems, data, industry, and science. The German soldier had marched with faith. The American soldier had fought with calculation. And in that collision, faith broke against the cold precision of numbers. When the smoke cleared over the Ardennes, the U.S. Army had proven something that would define the next century. That wars are no longer won by men alone, but by the civilizations that stand behind them. When the guns finally fell silent in the Ardennes, the Allied soldiers who survived the winter still heard the echoes of artillery days later. The deep rolling sound embedded in their bones. The snow-covered landscape was littered with twisted metal, burned-out tanks, and unrecognizable shapes buried beneath frost. But what most didn't see, what most couldn't imagine, was how that victory had been forged not only in blood but in calculation. Behind every American shell fired stood a machine civilization that never slept. From the assembly lines of Michigan to the steel foundries of Pennsylvania, the rhythm of production became America's heartbeat. Every gear that turned, every rivet hammered, was part of an invisible orchestra, playing a single tune. Efficiency equals victory. By 1945, the United States had built 297,000 aircraft, 88,000 tanks, and more than 40 billion rounds of ammunition. But none of that would have mattered if it weren't for one crucial concept: coordination. The genius of the American war effort wasn't just its size, it was its synchronization. Factories, railroads, ports, and battlefields all connected like the nervous system of a single organism. Where the Axis powers fought like rival organs, America fought as one unified body. This was a war not of chaos, but of order. Few soldiers understood it then, but every bullet fired in the Ardennes was a triumph of logistics. The Red Ball Express, a vast convoy of trucks, driven mostly by African-American soldiers, kept the front lines alive. These men drove day and night through snow, mud, and enemy air attacks, often sleeping beside their engines just to keep the supplies moving. They called it hell on wheels. No lights, no brakes, just the endless road and the roaring of engines. Every gallon of fuel that reached the front was a miracle of coordination. Every artillery shell, a story of a factory, a worker, a railway switch, and a driver who refused to stop. The Germans, on the other hand, were running on fumes, quite literally. Their war machine depended on synthetic fuel plants bombed into ruin. Their tanks sat idle for lack of gasoline. Even their vaunted Tiger tanks, deadly as they were, became iron coffins when the fuel ran dry. That was the hidden genius of American warfare. Not only overwhelming force, but the unbroken flow that sustained it. To understand how the U.S. outproduced the Reich by such staggering margins, you have to look inside the factories that never slept. In Detroit, the Ford Motor Company transformed its automobile plants into aircraft production lines. The same hands that once assembled family cars were now riveting the wings of B-24 Liberators. Women, Rosie the Riveters, filled the assembly floors, their scarves tied back, their hands blackened with grease. Each rivet was a bullet. Each aircraft a symbol of defiance. Henry Kaiser, the shipbuilding magnate, changed the tempo of naval warfare forever. Before the war, building a single cargo ship took months. By 1943, Kaiser's Liberty ships were being launched in under 5 days. It wasn't just speed, it was scale. These ships carried the tools of total war: jeeps, fuel, ammunition, food, medicine, everything a soldier could possibly need. The Allies didn't just fight battles, they fed them. Germany could never match that tempo. Its industrial complex, once feared for its precision, was strangled by its own ideology. Slave labor replaced skilled workers. Bureaucracy choked innovation. And while American factories evolved daily, German plants were frozen in time, bombed relentlessly, and starved of raw materials. By 1945, American industry wasn't just outproducing Germany, it was redefining warfare itself. While the factories worked around the clock, another war was being fought, silent, secret, and unseen. It wasn't fought with bullets, but with information. Inside a small English estate called Bletchley Park, The British had cracked the Enigma code, Germany's supposedly unbreakable cipher, with help from American engineers and mathematicians. The Allies could now read German communications almost in real time. Every time a German division moved, Allied planners already knew its destination. Every time fuel was ordered or reinforcements called, those messages were intercepted, analyzed, and acted upon. The Germans thought they were executing surprise offensives, but their enemy already saw them coming. It was in every sense the world's first information war, and in it, the Allies wielded a new kind of weapon, data. Yet even in victory, the cost was unbearable. Every shell that found its target meant lives were extinguished. Every town liberated came with ruins, graves, and faces forever lost to history. In Bastogne, after the snow melted, American medics walked through fields where the dead lay so thick they had to step over them. In small villages across Belgium, children wandered among burned-out tanks, their innocence buried beneath the snow. And though the war machine roared on, some soldiers began to wonder, was the world losing its soul to its own efficiency? They had seen too much, heard too much. The hum of the artillery had replaced the human heartbeat. But for the generals in command, there was no time for reflection. Only the next campaign, the next front, the next objective. By March 1945, the last German resistance in the West had been broken. The Rhine River, once Hitler's proud natural barrier, was crossed in days. American artillery units now fired in constant rhythm, day and night, supporting the unstoppable advance. They didn't need to chase the enemy anymore. The enemy was running. In the skies above, P-51 Mustangs escorted endless streams of bombers deep into Germany. The Reich cities burned, Dresden, Hamburg, Cologne, each a grim testament to the industrial apocalypse unleashed upon Europe. What had started as a struggle of armies was ending as a struggle of endurance, and Germany, exhausted, isolated, and starving, was crumbling from within. As the Red Army closed in from the east and the Americans from the west, Hitler's empire began to eat itself alive. Factories stood empty. Railways lay shattered. Entire divisions existed only on paper. Even the once feared Waffen-SS couldn't hide the inevitable. In April 1945, as Berlin was surrounded, Hitler ordered artillery units that no longer existed to hold ground that no longer mattered. The few remaining shells were fired into the ruins of his own capital, the final, meaningless echo of a war machine that had once terrified the world. And then, silence. The silence of defeat. When the guns finally went quiet, the lessons of the war didn't fade. They evolved. The scientists who built radar-guided shells and proximity fuses went on to pioneer computers, rocketry, and nuclear technology. The mathematical precision that won the Battle of the Bulge laid the groundwork for the Cold War's digital warfare. Detroit's factories returned to making cars, but the knowledge remained. The same logistics that fueled victory would later fuel the world's greatest consumer economy. The war had changed humanity forever, because in those years between 1939 and 1945, mankind learned something profound. That progress and destruction could share the same heartbeat, that innovation could build or annihilate, and that the line between them was thinner than anyone had imagined. History is not written by chance. It's built, forged, and measured in the factories of determination and the minds of visionaries. World War II proved that even the smallest invention, a fuse, a formula, a blueprint, can alter the course of civilization. As we look back, it's not just a story of war, but of transformation. A reminder that behind every explosion, there was ingenuity. Behind every victory, a human mind. And as the echoes of artillery fade into time, the lessons remain. Because those who understand history don't just remember it, they shape the future. If you've made it this far, thank you for joining this journey through the machinery of destiny. Don't forget to subscribe and stay with us for more untold stories from the Second World War. Tales of courage, technology, and the unseen minds that built the world we live in today. And before you go, click on one of the videos appearing on your screen right now to uncover another forgotten chapter of the war that changed humanity forever.